So lucky to have Laura Kate Dale with us today. Suddenly decided to drop everything she was doing and talk to us. Laura, thank you so much. How are you and what have you been up to?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. It's always a delight. I've been doing work on a future book project today. I got my first development edit back for Who Hunts the Whale, which is I've written plenty of published books before, but this is my first fiction novel, and it's my first book I've co-written with my wife, Jane.
Oh,
It is a satirical novel set in a fictional video game studio that you could probably draw some parallels to some real world companies of the last few years. A year in the life of a PA who has started working in this company going, hey, I want to be a part of seeing how the things I love are made, and very quickly realizing, oh no, this is a capitalist nightmare hellscape. What do I do about the excesses of how the things I love are made? And struggling with how to exist with the realities of how video games unfortunately come to be sometimes.
that sounds incredible. It is an
Yeah.
experience so many people I know who are of a certain age, usually over 22 or so,
Mm.
dawn upon them that the fantasy of playing games, making games, talking about games, all of that stuff, because games is a place where people who only want money are quick to want to get a foothold
Yeah.
to try to work around them if you
I
got
mean,
into games just for the love of
yeah.
it, as you did, can be
Yeah.
really tough. That sounds like relatable content in
It's
that book.
Yeah, it's a thing I think a lot of people are wrestling with right now. Like, if you are big into video games, the last couple of years has involved a lot of, oh, I might have loved games from X company, but can I support them after what they're doing? I think we're seeing it outside of games at the moment with like people seeing Disney's support for the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida
Mhm.
financially. And like, it's a thing that you eventually have to reach a point where you wrestle with of how do I how do I deal with the fact that the things I love are unfortunately not created in a vacuum, and capitalism tends to breed the worst kind of people? It gravitates a lot of bad people.
And I hope people capitalism the book a bit, because last I
Yeah,
checked, it was 107% funded.
it is, but you can still go check it out on unbound.com/books/whale. Go check it out there. Who Hunts the Whale? It's up for pre-order. Look at me, I got the sales pitch down.
You're incredible at talking well about how poor capitalism is, and making sure that people put their capitalism in the right place.
Look, I exist within capitalism. I work with what I've got. If you're going to give your money to someone, give it to someone who says capitalism bad every now and then.
couldn't agree more. The real reason you were on today, though, was to talk about Elden Ring, a game that has wildly succeeded in a capitalist marketplace. Last I read, it had sold at least 12 million copies already, and I think it's been out for about 2 weeks. I
Mm,
see gifs of this game everywhere, and it's usually
mm.
of a wonderfully dressed person walking slowly, swinging a sword slowly, sometimes just holding up a shield at wolves and then dying. So I have no idea what's going on. I'd love to hear more about the story, what it's like to play, why you think it's doing so well, and what you think of it.
Uh, Much like all of the games that From Software has ever put out, this is a game where there is a story buried. If you want to read a lot of item descriptions for swords that you may never notice are hidden behind rocks. Um, at its core, it is a story about a world that is falling apart after the destruction of a big magical object, and there is a big power vacuum that has been left, and you are trying to maybe position yourself to take that position rather than the evil people who are currently vying over the power that's been left behind. Functionally, on the surface, it seems like any other From Software game we've had before. Your sort of Dark Souls, your Bloodborne, anything like that.
Mhm.
What makes this one feel really different is that it is the first game from in that series to have moved truly to sort of an open world format. And I think it's really surprising how well it has managed to do this. The game I keep making comparisons to is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild when that came out a few years ago. And I think this does a much better job of the things that really caught people's imagination about Breath of the Wild.
Mhm.
This is a game that once you get through its tutorial, completely just takes off the training wheels and goes, there is a world. There is nothing to arbitrarily stop you going any particular place. Some things might be a bit too strong for you to reasonably deal with, but if you want to go and try and tackle those challenges, go right ahead. It just opens up and lets you explore and follow whatever's taking your interest and just let you naturally explore a world. I think that there are some real benefits this game has had in terms of like the move to that format. One of the big problems with, say, a Dark Souls is that generally you've got a set number of very linear paths towards bosses. And if you are really struggling with an area, your only option would have been to backtrack down the linear path, admitting defeat, and go try something else. And that's something that I think a lot of players really resist. It's that idea of having to walk backwards and admit defeat. But here, if you're coming up against a boss that you're struggling to defeat, you don't have to, walk back down a linear path and admit defeat. You just take a right turn and see what's over there. I'll go try that and I'll come back round to this. It feels a lot less like you're committing to, like you're giving up on things. And that seems to allow a lot more, I'll come back and try this later, feels a little less unfair.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. On top of that, like, it's still a very unforgiving and challenging game, but there are a lot of little tweaks that make this more forgiving than Dark Souls, etc., have been in the past. Little things like most bosses now having a checkpoint just outside the door, so you don't have to run all the way through a level to try the boss again. You can just try the boss again. Being able to much more effectively, if you've decided you've put your levels into the wrong stats and you want to try again, it's much easier to get resources to just completely respec your stats and put all your levels in again and try something else. It locks you a lot less into single ways of playing. You can just completely decide to start over and not have to redo a lot of work for that. And then I think the other thing that's really worth knowing about it is probably the best density of content I've seen in an open world video game in a very long time. It doesn't feel like, if you compare this to something like Horizon Forbidden West that recently released, which it's a big open world, but there's a lot of empty space and there's a lot of the same type of content copy and pasted into different locations. Really doesn't feel like you have a lot of this here. There are constantly new kinds of enemies being thrown at you that are very distinct, very different. There's lots of different environment types that open up. It never feels like it is recycling content at you in order to pad itself out and make itself larger. It may not be as physically large in terms of like actual distance to cover as some games, but there is so much more packed into that area that I am constantly realizing that there's whole huge chunks of content I've just completely walked past and not noticed, just out of sight. It is a really impressive game in that regard.
Yeah, I've heard people continually say, I had no idea that there was this underground cavern. I had no idea that if I climbed this tree, I would be able to see XYZ thing. And the sense I've gotten is that people have gotten into sort of a rhythm with open world games where they expect there to be a lot of area where it's just there to walk through. And this game is different, where every area, if you poke around a little bit, you might find a surprise, or it may start raining wolves. I was watching a video of it the other day, and wolves just came from the sky, from clouds that are shaped like wolf moms. I have no idea. And they got ready to fight.
Yeah. And I'll say this. I think one of the things this game does really well is it deliberately sets your expectations quite small and then keeps expanding them. Often when you play a big open world video game, if you look at your starting area, Breath of the Wild might be a good, easy example for this as a reference point. You start that game on the Great Plateau, this very small starting area. And if you zoom out the map right from the start of the game, you can go, oh, that area I'm on is this size. This is the size of the rest of the game. I have a sense of scale for this adventure. Elden Ring, by comparison, zooms in its map to show you only places you have been and little bits at the edge to be like, there's something over there. Until you go to a new area and start exploring it, the map doesn't zoom back to accommodate that. Meaning that you don't really know how much bigger the world is than where you've been. And that keeps being used to keep upping the scale of what you think the end point of this adventure is. I think that's really effective.
Yeah, sounds like the sense that you truly don't know what to expect is instilled in the player in a variety of different ways, everything from what's on the screen to the map screen to the raining wolves, all of these things that keep you wondering, what are they going to do next? And that relationship with the developers, so it's FromSoft, Miyazaki, and also J.R.R. Martin?
George R.R. Martin.
George.
Yeah.
But his story is buried in sword descriptions, and
the intention the understanding I have is that he's written a bunch of like world building conceptual stuff, and it's out there somewhere. Go find it. There's a lot of stuff about this that is still very From Software in that like it is at times a needlessly unforgiving game. There are things like there's a lack of a quest log, which means that like it's very easy to forget of the many hundreds of things you've stumbled upon what you could be doing. There are issues with certain mechanics not being explained well, or like very fundamental gameplay aspects you can just completely miss the NPC that would give you access to, and you just don't get to use that part of the game. There are things about this that are unforgiving and just like needlessly obtuse. But despite that, I am fascinated by this game.
Yeah, you are a huge advocate and expert on accessibility when it comes to physically playing a game, when it comes to the social, emotional, mental experience with a game. And I have only gotten a taste of it, but my sense is there's also a lot of collecting in it, which had my alarm bells go off immediately around how that would affect people who may have obsessive compulsive disorder or another series of experiences that lead them to feel extremely badly if they cannot find everything in a game. So I don't know if you have thoughts on how the game might be for folks with those experiences.
I feel like this has always been a thing with From Software games. I think it's more so the case ever than it has been before with Elden Ring, in that it is functionally impossible to get everything because this is a large world that is not easily subdivided into I'm just going to back and forth perfectly check everywhere. It is a sprawling, messy, not always easy to be thorough with environment, and that helps it to feel really alive and it helps it to feel very lived in. But it does mean that you do have to go in with a knowledge of I'm not going to see everything naturally. If there is something that I want to see, Google, find out where it is. If it's an individual thing where you're like, oh, I want to know how to get so and so, just Google it, because there are so many arbitrary quests that you wouldn't know how to start and things that are hidden in locations you wouldn't think to check. It's so easy to miss content in this, and as great as that can be for people who are like, wonderful, I'm going to have this unique experience where I don't know what's coming, you have to be okay with you can't tick box and have everything perfect. That is unfortunately not really the kind of game it is.
Sure. And my understanding is there are ways to leave hints for other players as you play, which is a From Software thing that's been around for a while. So the understanding is part of the fun is not knowing and then discovering via those hints or via hints you find on Google, which connects you with other people who are playing the game outside of the game or in.
I like that message leaving hint system in theory. There are a lot of places where it is used very effectively, where people just leave very genuinely useful hints about how to navigate this world. But I think more so than any previous Souls game as well, there is a lot of people who just use those messages to waste other people's time in a way that can make it frustrating to check them, to the point that there are certain areas where the unhelpful trolling messages outweigh the positive ones to such an extent you might not see the helpful information that's there. There's only so many hundreds of times I can read try finger butthole. Like it's funny for a while, but like 70 hours in, Okay, well done. You did it.
And with more people than ever playing it, and a pretty large audience from what I've heard who didn't know what to expect, thought that since it was getting 10 out of 10s everywhere, that it would be for them. But in fact, are finding that it's not the right kind of challenge. So I wanted to maybe wrap up on that. If you had to talk about yourself a little bit and talk about the game and how you fit with it, and how it is both challenging and difficult and painful even, but also beautiful and easy to enjoy and fun, where that balance is between the parts that are less challenging to engage with and more challenging to in a fun way to play with.
As someone that struggles with a lot of video games mechanically, I have a disability that impacts my fine motor control. I really appreciate that there is a lot of stuff to do in this game that is novel, but not always challenging. If you're not pushing forward through the main quest and trying to defeat the main quest bosses you need to do, usually any particular challenge in front of you is somewhat optional. And there will be things you can, like if you're struggling with a boss, you can do what I do. Go and find an area that you haven't been to before that is new and interesting, but low level. Go farm for some experience. Come back and try that boss when you're a bit over leveled. There is such a density of things to see that you will not run out of for a very long time. Stuff that isn't boss fights to go do until the numbers just make sense that you'll be able to get past where you're struggling. I think it's a very satisfying game in terms of the loop of try again, keep trying. I think that it really helps that this game has introduced summons that you can bring into most boss fights, that you can use a little bit of magic power to bring in an additional creature or something like that that will draw a bit of aggression and distract the boss to give you openings. There's a lot of tools here designed to give you breathing room and to let you come back when a challenge is more approachable. And it's still not going to be for everyone, but I think that there's a good chance of being less frustrated with this than there have been some past FromSoft games in that regard.
Interesting. You are huge on accessibility options, and it sounds like this one gives you options around accessibility and otherwise. The saying, if you want to call it that, around FromSoft games is often get good. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, get good.
But this one is more get good or not. Just stay not good and have fun anyway.
There are ways to get around not getting good. And a lot more of them are baked into the mechanics of the game in ways that it's weird to articulate this. A lot of people who've always been very never summon in other players to help you with boss fights, that's cheating just to get good, are very okay with people using the summonable jellyfish ghost that can come help you, even though it functionally does the exact same job. It's just providing a second target to draw aggression, so you've got openings to attack more safely. There's little things about this game's design that are functionally doing what the get good crowd have always said, oh, no, don't use that mechanic, in a way that hasn't annoyed them. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Yeah, I don't have to deal with other humans, and I can still have a big jellyfish that helps protect me with poison spit.
That sounds great. So no one is annoyed. Everyone has the option to play the way they want. You can be almost darn right pacifistic, it sounds like, if you want to, and still find plenty to do.
Yeah.
Any closing words, Laura? You've said so many wonderful words in such a short amount of time. Talk about content density. You've packed it in this impromptu review. Any final thoughts?
I still haven't completed Elden Ring, but so far it has really stepped up a quality bar for what I expect out of an open world video game in terms of quality. Last thing I would add, it's made me really think about Breath of the Wild 2 and what I would want out of a sequel from that, because this is one thing this has done really well, is put linear dungeons into an open world environment in a way that feels satisfying, that I really hope we see Nintendo learn from in the future. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's a fascinating, if occasionally unforgiving, little game.
You're fascinating and constantly forgiving of me and all my impromptu requests to work with you on stuff. And I thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.